So we request your blessings so we can speak something on this powerful, potent, purifying Srimad Bhagavatam. So I'll just say the invocation mantra. And we'll be reading from third canto, chapter 5, text number. It's coming up on the screens. Text number 26. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So I'll read the Sanskrit translation, Sanskrit translation, the purport, and then we'll dive in to try to touch upon the wonderful points being made by Vyasadeva in his Srimad Bhagavatam, and also Srila Prabhupada's elaboration. So, Kalakvritya Tumayayam Gunamayam Adoksajaha Purusenatma Bhutena Veyam Adata Veyavan. Okay, so in terms of the word for word, Kala, the eternal time, Vritya, by the influence of, to, but, Mayayam, in the external energy, Guna Mayam, in the qualitative modes of nature, Adoksajaha, the transcendence, Purusena, by the Purusha incarnation, Atma Bhutena, who is the plenary expansion of the Lord, Viryam, the seeds of the living entities, Adata, impregnated, Viryavan, the supreme living being. Okay, translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta, Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. The supreme living being, in his feature as the transcendental Purusha incarnation, who is the Lord's plenary expansion, impregnates the material nature of three modes, and thus, by the influence of eternal time, the living entities appear. Okay, so to the purport. The offspring of any living being is born after the father impregnates the mother with semen, and the living entity floating in the semen of the father takes the shape of the mother's form. Similarly, mother material nature cannot produce any living entity from her material elements unless and until she is impregnated with living entities by the Lord himself. That is the mystery of the generation of the living entities. This impregnating process is performed by the first Purusha incarnation, Karanana Vasai Vishnu. Simply by his grace of material nature, the whole matter is accomplished. We should not understand the process of impregnation by the personality of Godhead in terms of our conception of sex. The omnipotent Lord can impregnate just by his eyes, and therefore he is called all-potent. Each and every part of his transcendental body can perform each and every function of the other parts. This is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita, Angani Yasya Sakalendriya Vritti Manti. In Bhagavad Gita 14.3, also the same principle is confirmed. Mama Yoni Mahat Brahma, Tasmin Garbham Dadatyaham. Dadam Yaham. When the cosmic creation is manifested, the living entities are directly supplied from the Lord. They are never products of material nature. Thus, no scientific advancement of material science can ever produce a living being. That is the whole mystery of the material creation. The living entities are foreign to matter, and thus they cannot be happy unless they are situated in the same spiritual life as the Lord. The mistaken living being, out of forgetfulness of this original condition of life, unnecessarily wastes time trying to become happy in the material world. The whole Vedic process is to remind one of this essential feature of life. The Lord offers the conditioned soul a material body for his so-called enjoyment. But if one does not come to his senses and enter into spiritual consciousness, the Lord again puts him in the unmanifested condition as it existed in the beginning of the creation. The Lord is described here as Viryavan, or the greatest potent being, because he impregnates material nature with innumerable living entities who are conditioned from time immemorial. Omagyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chekshu Ummilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swabadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapad Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Virgina Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasudi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I want to begin by recognizing my wonderful senior god sister, Mother Vrajalila, and to request her blessings, her grace, and that of all of you, that we can speak something on this exalted Srimad Bhagavatam text. The verse is a supreme living being in his feature as a transcendental Purusha incarnation, who is the Lord's plenary expansion, impregnates the material nature of three modes. And thus, by the influence of eternal time, the living entities appear. When I saw this verse, when I read this purport, the first thing that came to mind was my degree at university. The reason why it came to mind is because when we were studying at university, for better or worse, let's say, one of the things that we studied was scientific method. And it was a real eye-opener. It was a real eye-opener to try to understand how the scientists come to the conclusions that they reach. And within the treasures of Krishna consciousness, within the treasures of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, of the various treasures, those treasures of Srila Prabhupada's books, we have one book called Life Comes from Life. And in that book, Prabhupada makes a very interesting statement. He says the scientists, they are always adding and subtracting. And when we read that statement, it sounds nice, but it also sounds a little bit unclear unless we actually understand the context. Prabhupada says the scientists, they are always adding and they are always subtracting. And so years ago, I think it was some kind of discourse. And so this statement was being explained, which really stood out to me. And once I heard it explained, I started to notice that when I was watching the news, when I was hearing about the scientists and what they've discovered, I kept hearing that statement by Prabhupada. The scientists, they are always adding and subtracting. What does Prabhupada mean by this? When you sometimes hear in the popular media about scientific discoveries, you'll often hear a statement which goes as follows. The statement will be something akin to the scientists previously it was believed like this, but now the scientists have discovered that actually their latest theory is that it's actually like this. And what Prabhupada was actually saying was so dead on. The scientists are always adding and subtracting, meaning there's one theory, and that theory is later on simply replaced by another theory. But the The craftiness, and this craftiness is a defining characteristic of the material world. The craftiness is it's so cleverly stated that you never actually understand what's really going on. If it wasn't cleverly stated, it would sound different. If it wasn't cleverly stated, it would be the scientists were wrong. For years, the scientific community were telling us that this was true. And now what they've realized is everything that they were saying on this particular subject for the past 100, 200, 300 years has been completely incorrect. And they're sorry. And we've wasted a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources pushing this wrong narrative. And now, even though we used to believe that, we've realized it's wrong. Now we have a different guess. Now we have a different idea. But you should trust us anyway. Yeah, I know we got it wrong last time, but you should trust us anyway, because we're sure we're right this time. When I studied scientific method at university, they looked at the history of science and how scientific theories constantly change and evolve. They also pointed out something very interesting. They pointed out that just like any community, right? So we have here people from different backgrounds. So we could say we're devotees. I guarantee if you do a survey of each and every one of us on this call, we don't all agree on everything in the same way. Guaranteed. You can take a particular group or gender. Let's say you take all the women. Guaranteed, not all the women agree on something. You take all the men. Guaranteed, not all the men agree on something. So when they talk about the scientific community, what they don't say is that there's huge variance. There's a huge variety of different opinions within that community. And this also goes to this particular verse in purple. This verse is the statement of the Bhagavatam about how the living entities appear. And this is one of the key, I repeat, one of the key mysteries of modern science. How did we get here? This idea that there are different opposing arguments for the existence of the living being. You can go online right now, and practically the vast majority of people who will talk about how humans have appeared on the planet will speak very authoritatively about something that they don't actually understand. This is the second point. It always shocked me. If you do a survey and you talk to people, how did the universe come about? They'll tell you, well, we actually know the answer. We know it was the Big Bang Theory. Scratch beneath the surface. Okay, so just help me to understand. How did scientists come to that conclusion? Uh, well, but they did an experiment. What was the experiment that they did, which indicated that that the universe came about by a Big Bang? Well, they did some kind of hypothesis. They must have done some kind of scientific. What was the experiment? Just help me to understand. The vast majority of people who believe in the Big Bang Theory do not understand how that theory has come about. They've just accepted it. So this is always very interesting for us as devotees, because the claim is made that religious people have blind faith, which is such an interesting claim considering that the vast majority of people on the planet who believe certain basic scientific theories about the nature of creation and the nature of existence, if you were to ask them, what's the proof? What's the logic behind that particular theory? They could not answer that question. And this is what we call the shadow. The shadow is the stuff about my own thinking that's so outside of my awareness that it doesn't even occur to me. I don't even notice that I've got this blind spot. I don't even notice that I'm claiming that all of you as religious people blindly accept something, and it doesn't even occur to me. I'm not even aware of how many things that I accept as true fundamentally argue for, stand by, have not even been questioned, explored, analyzed, or understood. So these verses, purports of Srimad Bhagavatam, they perform a whole range of different transformations of consciousness. This point, the transcendental Purusha incarnation, the Lord's plenary expansion, impregnates the material nature of three modes, and thus by the influence of eternal time, the living entities appear. So we're manifesting in this world according to God's schedule. Kala. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's explained that there are 5 themes. Okay, so what are they? There is Ishvara, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself, Krishna. There's Jiva, okay, every living entity, which is being spoken about here. Ishvara, Jiva. And then there is Prakriti. Prakriti is this material nature. So between the Jiva, that's us, and Prakriti, right? The movement between us and Prakriti, that movement is karma. So I'm a jiva and I act, and that act affects this material energy, Prakriti. But there's not just the Ishvara, not just the jiva, not just the karma, not just the Prakriti. There's also this point that's being made here in the verse, Kala. Kala is very, very powerful. Color is very, very powerful. Why? Color is very powerful because color is an amazing example of Krishna's genius. Color is very, very powerful. It's an amazing example of Krishna's genius. In what way? It's just like this. You program your mobile phone, okay? There's a software in your mobile phone. You program the software. You can go away. You can go about your whole daily business. But because you programmed your mobile phone, because you've set the alarm on your mobile phone, even if you fall asleep at night, because you've programmed your mobile phone, at a certain point, that alarm is going to go off because it's been programmed. Time is the programming. Time is the software within material creation. Your body has a program, and that program, that software is time. That's why the body goes through these transformations, birth, right? Transformation. Then there is childhood, transformation, the programming of time. From that childhood, you get to the youthful age, programming of time. Then we get to adulthood, programming of time. Then we become elderly, programming of time. Then eventually, the same program, the same software takes us to the point of death. It is all the programming, the software named color. It's a software. Interestingly enough, in first canto Bhagavatam, what does Prabhupada say? He says the duration of life is actually being minimized by what does he say? Irregular habits. Isn't that an interesting statement? The duration of one's life is minimized by irregular habits. Again, very, very interesting statement. And respectfully, when I think about so many devotees that I know, respectfully, when that statement is read, sounds nice. Sounds interesting. Sounds a little bit unclear. The vast majority of times that that statement's read, it's like, well, what does he mean? How can duration of life be minimized by irregular habits? Again, color, time. According to Ayurveda and according to modern science, every single one of us has a body clock. The official title is the circadian rhythms, the circadian clock. And that clock, I can see people smiling. I know some of you know that you'll be familiar with that. That circadian rhythm within the body, it determines when cortisol, a certain hormone, is released in the body in the morning that gives you the energy to get up in the morning. That same circadian clock, it determines when melatonin is released in the body. The melatonin helps the body to fall asleep. You know, they found that people who work shifts, right, late nights, you know, they're awake and they're working when everyone else is sleeping. It's now considered by certain medical global bodies that shift work is a carcinogen. It's cancer producing. Why? Because it messes up the body clock. It messes up the body clock, which means what? It means that the hormones don't trigger within the body at the right times. And because those hormones within the body don't trigger at the right times, then all other types of dis-ease, right? We talk about this when we talk about health, disease, dis-ease, the body and the mind being out of ease. That becomes the precursor to so many other illnesses. So what's that programming? What's that programming that we call the circadian rhythm, the body clock? Same thing that this verse is speaking about. Color, one thing, time. Time I am, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. And time is therefore the thing that every single one of us are scared of. We're scared of time because time means what? Time is the greatest symbol of the lack of control of every single living entity. There's a famous person. He's a millionaire, and what he does is he engages in a whole range of different protocols, health regimes, practices in order to try to slow down or reverse the aging process. Okay, what's he trying to do? He's trying to go against time. Why? Because we know that time is a very, very powerful and very scarce resource. The difference between the spiritualist and the materialist, it can be fundamentally understood as a difference in the investment of time. How we invest our time. You can see this principle in every area of life. Let's take money, any resource. Where you invest your money shows your value system. It's that simple. It's not what I say I'm going to invest in, it's what I actually invest in that shows my value system. Okay. Same thing with time. Where I invest my time shows my value system. It shows in a very, very deep, intimate way. By the way, it doesn't even show the value system that I have consciously, which is very, very interesting. Because I can turn up and say that this is important to me, etc., etc., etc. But where I invest my time, it shows the value system that has taken hold of me subconsciously. The value system that has taken hold of me subconsciously is shown by the way I spend my time, my energy, my money, my resources. So what we're doing as devotees, the devotees are alchemists. An alchemist is someone who's engaged in the process of transformation. The devotees, what are we trying to do? We're trying to transform the temporary into the eternal. There's a very interesting statement by Prabhupada. He says, if one gives up the temporary for the eternal, there's no loss. Okay? You let go of the temporary, it was going to leave you anyway. You gave up the temporary for the eternal, no loss. He says, however, one who gives up the eternal for the temporary, they lose everything. Because you've given up the thing which was going to last forever. You let that go. And you've taken hold of the temporary, which is bound to leave you in due course of time. So you've lost everything. So time is such a precious, powerful resource. And the way that we use it, we're trying to become more and more expert in using the time effectively in order to come back to the eternal, come back to the transcendental platform. And this purport by Prabhupada is also giving us some further clues into the understanding that can help us to move in this direction. Prabhupada writes, we should not understand the process of impregnation by the personality of Godhead in terms of our conception of sex. The omnipotent Lord can impregnate just by his eyes, and therefore he is called all-potent. Such a very powerful point. Why is that such a powerful point? Many reasons, one of them being that the tendency of everyone in the material world is to speculate about God. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has stated, the materialistic demeanor can never approach the supreme autocrat. Okay, very interesting. He's basically saying that everyone is speculating about God. You go to most religions, speculation about God. We have our idea. And what's being debunked throughout the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam is that Krishna is Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha Anadi Andi Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. Krishna is the cause of everything. He's not the effect. He's the cause. The effect is his energy, his separated energies, but he has his own distinct form, activities, nama, rupa, guna, lila. He has his own specific spiritual identity, and the way that his body works is not necessarily the way that the material body works. So Prabhupada is making this point about how the Supreme Lord can impregnate just by his eyes. Each sense can perform the activity of the other senses. It's very interesting. It doesn't work like that in this material world. Therefore, our acharyas explain that this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. It is a reflection, but only in some ways. Therefore, they say it's a perverted reflection of the material world, perverted reflection. When God breathes, entire universes come out. When we breathe, what comes out? When Mother Yashoda looks into Krishna's mouth, she sees the entire universe. When someone looks into our mouth, what do they see? Very, very big difference. Very, very big difference. Now, in relation to this particular purport, Prabhupada is also really making a point about the material scientists. When the cosmic creation is manifested, the living entities are directly supplied from the Lord. They are never products of material nature. Thus, no scientific advancement of material nature can ever produce a living being. It's a very authoritative statement. A very authoritative statement. This is the beauty of spiritual knowledge. Spiritual knowledge is like someone who gives you the answer at the end of an equation. Anyone remember doing long equations at school? Okay, so you start with a number, times it by 10, minus 4, multiplied by 100, minus 2, divided by 50, right? Whatever it is, you have all these different digits. This long equation equals what? The Shastra is like that. The Shastra, it starts at that equals sign. Equals what? This is technically called Siddhanta, the conclusion of everything. So through the empirical process, the scientists are trying to come to the conclusion. This is the ascending process. We're trying to understand something from the bottom up, but we don't understand that we have no access to the conclusion. Why? Because the conclusion itself is spiritual, and the process that we're using to try to understand everything is material. This is a big problem. The problem of the material scientists is the problem of incompatibility. That's the problem. The problem is all around incompatibility. I want to understand the origin of something. I don't understand the nature of that origin. I don't understand that the thing I'm trying to understand, the origin that I'm trying to understand is spiritual. I don't know that. But I've got a ton of material instruments. So we're going to get going. I'm going to use all my material instruments to try to understand the origin. And the more and more I use these material instruments, the more and more I start to see, if I'm honest, that the instruments are not sufficient for the thing that I'm trying to understand. And therefore, if one is an honest scientist, then what do? An honest scientist becomes a spiritual scientist. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Adhyatma Vidya, Vidyanam. Of scientists, of sciences, I am the supreme science of self-realization. An honest scientist becomes a bhakti yogi. There is an instrument which will allow us to perceive the supreme personality of Godhead. There is an instrument, and it is an instrument that every single living entity is born with. That instrument is the instrument of consciousness. That instrument is the heart. The instrument by which we will be able to perceive the spiritual reality is the instrument within. And specifically, that instrument has to become, let's say, it has to be healed. The instrument has to come back to its original form. Pramanchana charita bhakti vilochanena. When one's eyes, one's vision are completely rectified by love, let's say. When our vision is completely rectified by love for Krishna. When the Chaito Darpana Marjanam, when the cleansing of the mirror of the heart has reached its completion, then we'll be able to see these spiritual realities. I sometimes watch these debates between atheists and religionists. And sometimes I find them very interesting, but I also understand that they're in one sense a waste of time. Because even in the Vedic tradition, we debate. But in the Vedic tradition, the debates that we have are not like the debates of the materialists. You'll know what I'm talking about here. Let's make it very real. Have you ever noticed that, for example, in the world that we live in now, when people debate, it's not really about the truth. Have you noticed that? It's not two people who are coming together to really understand what's true. It's usually just a clash of egos, right? It's usually whoever can make the other person look stupid, whoever's good at insulting the other person. It's usually the case that if you're very good at it, you can just tell as many lies as you want because you're speaking so fast and you're debating people so quickly. No one has any time to do any research and check out if what you're saying is even true. I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking that what happens in the modern world is whoever's able to tell lies in the most confident way is usually able to get away with it. If you can lie with some panache, if you can lie with some charisma, okay, you lie nicely. If you can lie really, really nicely, in most cases, you can get away with it. And that's what Prabhupada means, cheaters and cheated. Cheaters and cheated. So it's a very, very sad state of affairs. And the material scientists, this material pursuit, if they're not cheaters, and if the experiment is done sincerely, at some point in the journey of so-called science, one has to realize I'm trying to understand something with the wrong instruments. And therefore, with that humility, okay, what are the alternatives? Krishna says, Savasya chaham ridishanivishto mata smriti jnanam apohanam cha. He says, from me comes knowledge, from me comes remembrance, and from me comes forgetfulness. So if someone wants to forget God, no problem. You become an atheist, no problem. It's literally because the individual in their deep internal consciousness doesn't want to know the truth. Okay? You don't want to know the truth? We will give you some facility by which you can forget that which is actually true. Yeah? And you'll actually be, you'll literally be convinced of your own lying. You know, there's research on this. So sometimes you have people in the world who are narcissistic. Okay. And the researchers found that those people who are narcissistic, they literally lie to themselves. They literally believe their own lies. They'll tell themselves, yeah, I'm stealing from this person, but it's for their own good. You know, I'm doing it and it's the right thing to do. And that's why they're so convincing because they believe their own lies. Therefore, that it's easier for them to lie to other people. They've convinced themselves of the lie. Of course, it's very, very dangerous. There's research on this, by the way. Every time a person lies to themselves, they damage their own ability to understand the truth. Isn't that interesting? Every time a person tells lies to other people, that process of lying to other people, it actually affects their own psychology and it damages their own ability to see and understand things truthfully. I was giving a class. I was just in Vrindavan and I was giving a class. We were talking about the modes of material nature. And I mentioned this point that I'd heard years ago. A very interesting point because in religion, most people think, well, if you don't do the right thing, God's going to mess you up, man. Phew, he's going to mess you up real bad. You better do what he says, right? Otherwise, you're in trouble. But in this class, we were making this statement. He says, we're not punished for our sins. We're not punished for our sins. We're punished by our sins. Meaning that actually, if I act improperly, it damages my own consciousness. If I act improperly, I mess up my own psychology. And this verse also gives a clue towards that because in the verse itself, it says a supreme living being in his feature as a transcendental Purusha incarnation, who is the Lord's plenary expansion, impregnates what? He impregnates the material mode of the material nature of three modes. So what we were explaining in the class in Vrindavan, we talked them through the logic of the Shastra. So we said that, look, if someone tells lies, what mode are they invoking? They're invoking the mode of ignorance, right? Literally ignorance, something which is not true, ignoring the truth. And then we explained in the Bhagavad Gita, what does Krishna say about one who's conditioned by the mode of ignorance? So when someone is lying, they trigger the mode of ignorance. And we know from the Bhagavad Gita that the mode of ignorance, it triggers what? Inertia, laziness, sleep, indolence. So what we were explaining to them is when I tell lies, I trigger the mode of ignorance. When I trigger the mode of ignorance, I contaminate my own consciousness with that mode. And when I contaminate my own consciousness with the mode of ignorance, that consciousness, which has now become filled with the mode of ignorance, pulls me down, forces me to become lethargic. It causes me to lose clarity, right? So bewilderment. So when the mode of ignorance covers the consciousness, I can't see things clearly anymore. I lose my clarity because of ignorance. I lose my dynamism. Inertia comes, right? I lose my dynamism because of ignorance. There was a study that found that people who sleep more than they should, they're more likely to experience depression. Isn't that interesting? Right? So we know oversleeping. What mode is that? It's ignorance. So what happens is someone sleeps more than they should. They don't realize, they don't know the Bhagavad Gita. They don't know Prabhupada's teachings. They don't know that that activity that I've done is going to trigger a particular mode of material nature. And that mode of material nature is going to affect my own mentality, my own consciousness, and pull me towards certain types of activity, thought processes, experiences. So again, the scientists, if they're not cheating, they come to understand at a certain point, I don't have the instruments necessary to find the origin. What are the alternatives? Then if they are sincere, Krishna will give them that knowledge. I give knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. Okay, you want to know the truth now? Okay, Here you go. And then that scientific person, at some point, in some way, shape, or form, comes in touch with this transcendental knowledge. And this is very interesting. Here, Prabhupada says, thus, no scientific advancement of material science can ever produce a living entity. That is the whole mystery of the material creation. The living entities are foreign to matter, and thus they cannot be happy unless they are situated in the same spiritual life as the Lord. And then he goes on to explain how, unless we actually come to that understanding and live by that understanding, we unnecessarily waste time trying to become happy in the material world. This is such a powerful thing. This is the conclusion. This is the universal conclusion. We're all trying to be happy. Every single living entity, every single one of us, we're not just trying to be happy, we're desperately trying to be happy. And this spiritual science is the perfect explanation of why we are unhappy, and the perfect explanation, the perfect recipe, the perfect process, the perfect agenda by which the very happiness that all of humanity is seeking can be truly realized. I'll say one more point on this, and then we'll open up for questions and comments. The happiness agenda is perhaps the most significant agenda in modern human civilization. Okay. Why do I say that? Because unhappiness actually produces all the issues in the modern world. Not just in the modern world, actually. Let's take it a step further. The unhappiness that we experience produces all the issues in our lives. Isn't that that's a very strong thing to say, but I mean it. So, for example, you have people who engage in comfort eating, right? Or people who engage in comfort shopping. So someone's really unhappy in their life. What do? Let me go and buy stuff. Let me go and buy things. In fact, not just buy things, let me go and buy things that I can't even afford. They rack it up a debt, right? Put it on my credit card. You're buying things that you can't even afford, right? Why? Because there is an endeavor and an attempt to fill up an emptiness that's inside. Think about this point. This is why this Krishna consciousness is so damn powerful. Because as long as humanity feels empty within, it will lead to all kinds of problems outside. Right? And even to the point, someone feels empty inside, even to the point that they now are going out to try to dominate people, control people. These are all poor coping strategies for feeling an existential emptiness. I'm unhappy and I don't know about Krishna consciousness. I'm unhappy and I don't know why I'm really unhappy. I think I'm unhappy because I just don't have enough material resources. I think I'm unhappy because you're not all worshiping me and telling me how great I am. I feel I'm unhappy because I'm not having enough sex. Right? I feel I'm unhappy because I don't have the prestige that someone else has. So it's a misdiagnosis. I don't understand that this emptiness that I feel inside is a spiritual issue. And then what do? I will actually literally destroy the planet. I will abuse Mother Earth to try to extract more and more of her resources in a desperate attempt, external attempt, to fulfill an internal issue. And this is the problem of the modern world. Our humanity is looking for happiness in all the wrong places. That's our issue. We're looking for happiness, but we're looking for it in all the wrong places, and literally we refuse to look where God says we should look. We're ready to look at any other opportunity for happiness, but if God says look here. No, 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 no. Whoa, no, Krishna, no. Hell no. Right? We're not going to do it. We have our own plan. I'm going to be happy by some other attempt. Why do I need to surrender to you? Very, very interesting. Krishna says, um, he says, Madgata prana bodhayanta parasparam kathayantischa mamnityam tusyanticha ramanticha. He says, my devotees are experiencing great bliss and satisfaction from doing what? From enlivening one another about me. He says that. This is our formula. So as devotees, we want to lean into that. There's, in other words, it is time for each and every one of us to get your bliss on. Right? Get your bliss on. Get your spiritual ecstasy on. Claim it. And the more that we go deeply into this Krishna consciousness, the more that we can purify our hearts, what we will find within the heart is a treasure of spiritual ecstasy. And to the extent that we don't find that, to the extent that we don't do the work, dig deep for that, we will always feel that there's a sense of emptiness or inconsistency and unhappiness within us. And it's not because there isn't a solution to this material world. There isn't a solution to this desire for happiness. There is a solution. But we have to claim the solution. We have to claim the gift. So this is really a call for each and every one of us to dig deeper. This is a call for each and every one of us to understand, as Prabhupada said, that this Krishna consciousness is not an artificial imposition on the mind. It is a call for each and every one of us to think to ourselves, to what extent am I feeling spiritual happiness? And if I'm not feeling that spiritual happiness, what do I need to do to claim the gift? How can I remove the barriers faster? How can I purify myself faster? For some of us, it's by better association. I'll make faster spiritual advancement and I'll remove all the barriers to my bliss by better association. For others, it's better chanting, right? Let me wake up earlier. Let me chant with the devotees. For others, I will bring about my bliss. I will remove the barriers to my bliss by avoiding making offenses, right? Because now I understand that when I make offenses, I'm polluting my own consciousness. I'm actually damaging myself. I think I'm saying something about the other person, but no, I'm actually damaging my own consciousness. For someone else, it may be I'm going to be more strict on following both the spirit and letter of the law of the order of my spiritual master. We all know what is important for us. We each and every one of us have our own distinct barriers to our bliss. And as we take that time to just figure out what are the barriers to my own bliss, what are the things that I'm doing in my spiritual life which are actually working against my own ecstasy? What am I doing in my spiritual life which is working against my own ecstasy? And again, in the spirit of this statement, we're not punished for our sins. We're punished by our sins, meaning that my own bad behavior is the thing that damages or pollutes my own consciousness, which makes my own devotional treasure, my own devotional wealth harder to claim. Okay, so we'll stop here and we'll open up for questions and comments.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Wow. Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, thank you so much for this wonderful delivery of Krishna Katha. Trying to follow in your footsteps, we want to recognize Grace Mother Brajalila, being in the Sangha. Hare Krishna, thank you, Mother. Thank you for being here. So, dear devotees, if anyone may have questions, comments, realizations you may want to ask or share, reflections, whatever, please, you may indicate by using the hand emoji or your physical hand, and you'll be asked to unmute, to speak, or to share. It's very interesting, Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, when you were talking about Srila Prabhupada saying that The scientists, all they do is add and subtract, add and subtract. And I was thinking about that, I said, wow, this is so interesting because the very early days of civilization, people used to think that the earth was flat. So people were afraid walking from point A to point B, thinking that they're going to fall into a valley. And before Galileo's invention, everybody thought that the earth does not rotate. So there have been so many additions and subtractions as far as science goes. So my question is, for us being devotees, knowing the inconsistency of uh, material science, uh, what do we do to abide by what is truth? And we know, like you said in your delivery, that when we talk of scientists not doing this, we talk about certain segments, but there are other segments that if someone is a true scientist, that will lead him to become a bhakti yogi, where I see that Srila Prabhupada talking about uh, the Supreme Lord being the actual cause of all living entities, and how in the early days there was this theory of spontaneous generation. You know, people thought that like a dead animal producing maggots is because the dead animal itself is producing the maggots, not knowing that it's actually flying uh, creatures that lay their eggs there. Prabhupada quoted Bhagavad Gita in his purport, where it also describes about scorpion laying eggs in rice. Now, for us as devotees doing all these things, how do we follow scientific theories and conclusions to live our lives? I'm asking this question because I very well remember during the COVID period, there were lots of devotees who shunned following all regulations by the medical people that put on mask. Some people say, why should I put on mask? Give social distancing. People say, why should I give social distancing? It may turn out that that is not actually the cause of getting these viruses. But at this present moment, it appears that that is what we need to do. So the question is, how do we as devotees, knowing that these scientists sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong, follow the scientific conclusions in our present moment? Hare Krishna.
Thank you for your question. I'm just going to meditate a little bit on what you're sharing. So when I studied scientific method at university, it wasn't the whole of my undergraduate degree, but it was a section of my undergraduate degree. They made a very interesting distinction. They talked about two different realms of science. So one is called realism and one is called instrumentalism. So realism refers to understanding the origins of reality, right? So where did life come from? Where did the universe come from? The big existential questions. That's realism. Instrumentalism was to do with how science is able to create things, whether it's inventions, whether it's medicines, different things like that, vacuum cleaners, whatever it is, technology. So they pointed out that just because someone's good at creating something doesn't mean they understand everything about it. And we know that, right? We know that sometimes there have been creations from modern science which have achieved something, but have also had side effects that we weren't aware of. You see? So the point here is that I'm not going to get into specifics about vaccines and COVID because that's very, very complex and that requires some knowledge and understanding. But what I would say as a standard way of approaching anything is we want to try to approach anything in goodness. Okay? So what does that mean? It means if I'm told something, I should and I can, when I'm concerned, ask questions. I should do research to try to understand the situation as clearly and subjectively as possible, you know? And I should inquire and also try to evaluate, okay, so who's the right person to inquire from, and ask the questions, evaluate, and then I can make an informed decision. The mode of goodness is that you act on the basis of knowledge. So, for example, if I'm told something that doesn't make sense or is illogical, I don't blindly accept it, but I may further inquire. You know, it's very interesting. It's similar to what Prabhupada says about the approaching of a bona fide spiritual master, right? He said you try to get a clear understanding. He said absurd inquiries are condemned. He also says blind following is also condemned. So to give a very interesting example, when I studied scientific method, they pointed out how, and Prabhupada says this all the time, as humans, we have certain flaws. Okay. So let's just play this out. So again, not talking about a particular medicine or protocol, but let's play this out. Let's say that I stand to make lots of money by selling a particular treatment to you. Okay. Now, if I'm not so, let's say, benevolent, and I find out that I can come up with a treatment that would completely cure you once at a very cheap rate, okay? Versus I can create another treatment that's not going to cure you, but it will suppress your symptoms for a short while. And then you're going to have to come back to me and buy again from me to suppress your symptoms for a bit longer. Then you're going to have to come back to me and pay me again to suppress your symptoms. Now, if I'm not a very benevolent person, if I'm a conditioned person, conditioned by a desire for greed, and if I live in a society that rewards money, greed, wealth as being a sign of how wonderful I am, what do you think I'm likely to do? Do you think I'm likely to produce the treatment that's going to be a one-off treatment that completely cures you and I'll never see you again, and even worse, never see your money again? Or am I likely to actually sell the second option, which is something that's going to cause you to keep buying from me, for the rest of your life? What do you think, Sahadev?
Well, if I'm not very benevolent, I would like you to come back again and again and again.
Of course, of course. And so let's be honest, right now in the world, we know for a fact, and the research also shows this, that we're not living, let's put it this way. It's not that everyone in positions of power are saints, isn't it? I think we're all adults, we can understand that. So therefore, we shouldn't necessarily expect that when things are done, that they're done purely with the best interests of humanity at heart. We should not be under any illusion about that. Now, at the same time, we don't want to go to the other extreme where we're always anxious about everything. No, we want to be in the middle. Middle means we're balanced, we're grounded, and we also do, when it's important, we also do our due diligence. I would add one more thing. If we look at it through the lens of the mode of goodness, then actually prevention is better than cure. Rather than waiting till something goes wrong and then having to evaluate things, what can I do to keep my health right so that there's less need for this kind of situation in the first place? Does that answer your question, Sahadev?
Yes, it does. And actually, it reminded me of His Holiness Swayam Bhagavan Keshava Swami Maharaj. He was here with us sometime last week, and with this very beautiful delivery all the time, he gave a picturesque scenario of different classes of beings: those who are pessimistic, those who are optimistic, and those who are realistic. And so he asked the assembled devotees, so which are we? And the conclusion is that we are all three. It depends on the situation. So that's exactly what you're saying. We have to use uh, our God-given intelligence to try to understand what's at stake
Yeah.
and act, behave accordingly. Thank you so much for answering my question. And we go to Her Grace Mother Brajalila Devi. Please, you may unmute.
Hari Hari Nitagoranga. Jai. Ready. Hari Bol Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu.
Krishna.
Yeah. Firstly, I just want to share how proud I am of you um, as a devotee, as a father, as a husband, as a teacher, as a servant. I'm just so very grateful to be your sister.
No, it's the other way around. I'm very grateful to have you as my big sister, actually. I'm useless. I'm very useless, but we're very grateful and we feel very inspired when we see you, actually. Yeah.
Well, okay, so I will accept that you speak the language of a devotee, and that's all right. However, uh, yeah, I love this theme for the year. Get your bliss on. Get your bliss on. It's like a beautiful theme to celebrate the fact that we're aspiring to be devotees and that we have devotees like you in our midst to remind us to keep that bliss on. One of the practical points you mentioned in your class was this theme about lying. And I guess I'd like you to expand on that a little bit because you're speaking about like the conditioned souls and you're speaking about, people that lie that normally they go, that's a mode of ignorance and that means inertia and all these things. However, and I say this in a mood of real curiosity about leadership as devotees, because sometimes as devotees, the tendency is to use lying as a tool in leadership. So how do we understand devotees that tell lies?
Very good question. It's a very good question. So let me meditate on that. How do we understand the fact that devotees sometimes use lying in leadership? Okay. So I guess we can classify different types of lies. Okay, so let's try and take this particular angle. So first of all, we look at the motive. Someone's lying and the actual motive is actually wrong. They want to damage other people. They want to mislead other people. They want to minimize other people. They want to slow down other people or hold them back. Then that's wrong end to end because the motive is wrong and the action is wrong. Now, there's a difference between that and someone who's diplomatic. Okay, so Prabhupada does say a leader has to be diplomatic. That's there. And that's also there in Bhishmadev's instructions to Yudhisthira. He'll put it in different ways, but he'll talk about that diplomacy. So that wouldn't necessarily be lying. Diplomacy is something different because if it's used properly, then diplomacy is where you actually have the best interests of everyone at heart. So the first thing is the intention has to be good. Second, one is actually keeping some confidentiality, not in order to bring someone down, but actually to elevate that particular person and to elevate the situation. You see? So I would say that we have to make a distinction between why someone is doing it or why someone is not, let's say they're not revealing the full story. And so why and whether it's being done for the well-being of everyone or it's being done for the detriment of others. So if it's being done for the detriment of other people, then actually it's unhealthy and it's going to be damaging for them and for other people. If it's actually being done for the best interests of others, then it has a different nature. And there's a story. There's a story. I think it's in our Shastra somewhere. So there was a story about the Brahmana. There was someone who's being chased by some bandits, and they ran past the Brahmana and they hid somewhere nearby, and the Brahmana saw them. And the Brahmana also later on saw the bandits who were searching for this innocent person. And the bandits asked the Brahmana, "Did you see someone go by? And if you did, where did they go?" And the Brahmana, in the name of not lying, he said, "Yeah, I saw the person. This is where they were hiding." And it's considered that that Brahmana, for telling the truth, he went to hell. He went to hell because actually he should have been intelligent enough to know that this is an innocent person who is being chased by criminals. And therefore, when they asked the Brahmana, did you see this person? Did you see where he went? He actually should have lied. Because the hierarchy of principle is that for the higher purpose, the lower thing can be considered or adjusted, but not for the lower purpose. Not for the lower purpose. So the way we have to consider it is very simple. We have to consider what is being done, why is it being done, and what's the effect. If that behavioral activity, if the person who's doing it genuinely understands the situation properly, genuinely has the best interests of others at heart, and knows for certain that this activity is genuinely going to cause the greatest upliftment of the situation for all concerned, that's one thing. If, however, the person is not able to meet those criteria, then he will act, then not only is the person he's lying to, is he potentially going to complicate their situation, but even more, he'll have to pay for it himself or herself. So that's how I would process and consider that question. I'm not sure if how you feel about or how you reflect on what I've said.
Well, it's a wonderful answer, and there are many devotees, I'm sure, that want to ask different questions. However, I just want to go under the ice, under the onion, maybe just a little bit,
Let's go.
just a little bit. So, given that sometimes someone might do something because their intention may be to cause some disturbance with the with other persons or situations or whatever it might be. Maybe their intention is not let's say even not in the mode of goodness.
Yes.
So what is the reaction for such a person if they're actually chanting Hare Krishna?
Good question. So there's a few things that can happen. Now it depends on the severity of what they're doing. In other words, if they're lying with a bad intention, okay, now it's a question of, okay, what's the severity of that lie? In other words, is it an offense, right? So they're lying, but it's a white lie. I told the devotee that there's no Mahaprasadam left because I wanted the Mahaprasadam. Okay, it's not gonna tear down their bhakti. It's a lie. I wanted the Mahaprasadam. I told them there's no Mahaprasadam, but like that. But that's very different. That's not gonna have a big impact. So it's a question of the context of that lie. But if that lie it has a very strong malicious intention, then what will happen is ultimately it will bring down the very person who's doing it. It may or may not affect the person they're lying to, because that person has their own karma, you see? So they may or may not be affected, they may or may not be inconvenienced, etc. It may or may not work. Let's say sometimes someone lies to someone and the person knows, "You're lying to me, I don't believe you. I'm not going to take seriously what you're saying." But all that's happened, I'll give our Guru Maharaj just an example. I remember one of our god sisters in a particular country, because our Guru Maharaj was very good at perceiving what was really going on. And so he was in one country and he asked the devotees in that country, "How are things going?" And they said to him, I think they painted a very rosy picture. Everything's going really, really well. And he told our god sister, and she told me actually, he said that, and he said, they told me, he said, "This is what they told me, and I knew that they were lying to my face." That's what he said. He said, "I knew they're lying to my face." So all that's happened is they just made themselves look bad because actually they're lying to someone who can tell that you're lying. So you think, or that person thinks that they're getting away with something. Actually, they're just damaging their reputation. They're destroying the trust because the person you're lying to, he knows you're lying. So all you've done is made yourself look bad. And he's probably gonna, well, not, it's not Guru much, but in other cases, we know our movement. There's no secrets in ISKCON. Let's be honest, there's no secrets in ISKCON. If people get the rep, I know one devotee like that. This dude is so manipulative, lying, but they think that people don't know that they're lying. Everyone knows. Everyone knows. People come to me and tell me that this person tells lies. What am I going to say? The person thinks that they're being very clever, and you thinking you're just damaging your own. You're just damaging your reputation. No one trusts you. So it depends on the context. If there's bad intent, that's really unfortunate because what's happening is it means that that person will pollute their own consciousness. Although, if they keep chanting, it will bring them to their senses that this is wrong. In addition to that, if they keep chanting, Krishna is often very merciful. If they keep chanting, Krishna in the heart can even tell them, don't lie. This is not good for you. Don't lie. And if they don't listen, then Krishna can arrange for them to have an experience whereby their lying gets them into real intense trouble, or they get exposed publicly, and then it causes them such a strong reaction that they realize, oh, this is working against me. And it's the same thing we talked about earlier. We're not punished for our sins, we're punished by our sins. But what we want to do as devotees is to be intelligent enough not to have to always learn the hard way. As devotees, we want to be intelligent enough to learn when Krishna just whispers in the heart, psst, don't lie. It's not good. Don't lie. It's just gonna make your life difficult. Don't lie. We don't want to be the devotee who has to get a slap on the wrists or a public humiliation because Krishna's very kind. Radha Damodar are very kind. Often they just tell us nicely. It's only when we continually ignore what Krishna says that the lesson becomes more and more intense and he has to turn up the volume more and more and more. That's my understanding and experience. Any thoughts on that, Mother Vrajalila?
Thank you for your balanced and compassionate answer. This is why I love you so much.
Thank you for wonderful and also I think this is what Guru Maharaj loved about you. I think with you, Mother Vrajalila, you're so real, and that's what I really like about you. I'll be honest. With Mother Vrajalila, I know you can have a real conversation. You can have a proper conversation. And it's not going to be like ISKCON cliches. It's going to be like, let's get down. What's really going on, right? What's really happening? So I appreciate that so much. Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna. Thank you so much. Madam Rajalila is so real. Sometimes I like to run away from her. I like to hide away because she will give it to you as it is. Bhagavad Gita as it is.
It is.
Hare Chakra Prabhu, please you may unmute. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, Hare Krishna. All
Hare
glory to you,
Krishna. Obeisances of God.
Bhavana Prabhu. Nice to see you.
Great to see
And
you.
all glory to Gurudev, all glory to Prabhupada, and all glory to Jasam Gurudev.
Very well.
Thank you for your nice class. And actually, about this question that Mother Vajela asked, the answer you gave is really, very perfect. And to buttress that, there is a situation, and in biblically in 1 Samuel chapter 16, there is a situation where God had asked Samuel to go and take the authority from Saul and give it to David. And Samuel had told God, no, if I go, he will kill me. He will kill me for telling him that. And God said, don't tell him the truth. God said, don't tell him the truth. Go and fulfill my desire. That's it. So in other words, Samuel had to go and tell that lie, but he did not tell that lie for his personal, what do we call it? For his personal gratification. But he had to tell that lie to establish what God's desire. So I could perfectly, relate to the answer you gave. That sometimes if you have to lie for the betterment of the environment, for the betterment of the individual, then why not? But unfortunately, like Mother Fragila was also pointing out, I mean, there are some people they are like chronic lies. They are chronic lies. No matter what you do, they will lie, and they always lie to establish themselves in a position. They don't care whether it brings somebody down, or not. They will keep lying. So thank you for the input.
Thank you.
Hare
I'll,
Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you. Good to see you. I'll just add, because obviously we always want to be careful about this. But I always want to be careful about this point about lying for Krishna, because what can often happen is people who have an attachment to lying, they then use it as an excuse. They think, oh, I'm doing it for Krishna, when really they're doing. That's why we're very, we're very cautious about this. So generally, the devotees were truthful. That's the point. And if anything, if we have to be diplomatic, so I won't even use the word lying. If we have to be diplomatic, even then we should be very careful to make sure that it's done with the right motive, genuinely at the right time, for a way that's in a way that actually is uplifting. Otherwise, we will have to deal with the repercussions. So just to add that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, for this particular last comment you made. Because when Mother Bragilla asked about the lion, and you answered, I was thinking of how, quote unquote, Krishna lied to his mother, Yashoda, when Mother Yashoda was told that your child is eating dirt. And Krishna said, no, but he used that as an opportunity to help Mother Yashoda to understand who he is. Mm. And the other side is when the Lord Chaitanya was eating mud, dirt, and it was sitting on the dumpster area there, and he was challenged by Sachi. He did not lie. He used that as an opportunity to give sound philosophy. So from the example you gave about the Brahmin telling the truth and going to hell, means that in all our actions, like you rightly said, the equation must be there. The equation should be, did what we say, did what we do end up in positivity for the individual or for the society in general? So I'm not sure if you may want to say something about what I'm conjecturing, but I think the bottom line or the equation is that if I can do something to help somebody, then it doesn't really matter whether it is deemed as lie or truth, but it's okay.
So again, I think we just have to always be a little bit cautious. So let's give an example. Sometimes devotees will go on Sankirtan, and when they're distributing books, they're going to say all kinds of things. Let's be honest, right? They'll say things like, we're here trying to, well, we've got these books, and they'll describe them in different ways. But that's not, and again, motive is good. It's not actually going to harm anyone. It's not actually technically a lie, because they'll talk about, we've got books on yoga, and their books are on yoga or meditation. So my point is that we always have to just be, we should try to be to be on the cautious side. So we don't even go into that space unnecessarily. And at the same time, recognizing that world that we are in, and recognizing that we need to try to share Krishna with as many people as possible in as healthy a way as possible, then we should still at the same time think, how can I, in the most let's say positive, encouraging, attractive way, share the message of Lord Chaitanya so that people will take to it. An example that came to my mind was before Prabhupada came to the West, he was describing how he has thousands of disciples in the West, he has these centers, etc., etc. He didn't have any of this at the time. When he said that, he had none of these things, you know. But there was that conviction. So it wasn't again positive intention, no harm to anyone, projecting an explanation. And you could even say with some of Prabhupada's caliber, he had that transcendental vision that these things are already present, but they are yet to manifest physically. Okay, so those are my thoughts. So we want to make sure that we have the letter of the law and the spirit of the law in mind when we're communicating. And ideally, to be honest, ideally, we just want to speak in such a way that there doesn't even need to be any kind of, let's say, um, any kind of adjustment of the truth.
Ambiguity. Well, thank you, Prabhuji. I'm not sure whom I heard this from, but I believe it is from Mother Rukmini Devi, Srila Prabhupada's disciple, my beloved disciple. I think she was sharing this pastime that some devotees were, I don't know whether she herself or some other devotees once asked Srila Prabhupada, you oftentimes reference Chanakya Pandit. But Chanakya Pandit is not a Vaishnav, it's just a moralist. And Srila Prabhupada said, yes, we follow morality. So, as devotees, if we follow morality, then we should also understand that, morally speaking, one should not lie. So, thank you for bringing up this theme, Mother Brajalila. Devotees, anyone else with something to ask or to share before we call it a day? Oh, Madhavan Prabhu, please. Hare Krishna, you may unmute.
Okay, Hare Krishna Prabhu. Hare Krishna, our God speaker.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for this very wonderful lecture and the way you have analyzed the analytical way of giving the lecture. I just want to bring our mind, there's a particular text in Srimad Bhagavatam. I want us to just look at it. Canto 8, chapter 19, 43.
1943.
Yes, that's right.
Did you say 9 or 19?
19.
Okay.
8.
1943.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
I'll share it here.
Okay. Yes, I see.
In flattering a woman to bring her under control, in joking, in a marriage ceremony, in earning one's livelihood, when one's life is in danger, in protecting cows and Brahmanical culture, or in protecting a person from an enemy's hand, falsity is never condemned. All right, so will you go ahead to speak?
Well,
Why you give us this reference?
Because of those are certain conditions, one can lie. You know,
I think
certain conditions.
Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu is here, but I think we should be careful with the word lie, because here it says flattering. Flattering is not technically lies per se, but I'll leave it to His Grace Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu.
Yeah, so again, this is what we said before. Context. Like if you tell a lie, it's a joke.
Yeah.
Everybody knows you're joking. It's not a problem. All I'm saying is I think it's important just to have a note of caution, because again, the tendency, and I'm not saying that the devotees on this call, but the tendency is to lean towards the lower common denominator. So if we're not careful, what happens is people may think, well, it's okay. There's a statement in Shastra that says I can lie, and then before you know it, it becomes more and more entrenched in the culture. So therefore, I do obviously this verse is there in the Bhagavatam. I was actually looking also to see who's actually saying this verse. So let's see. Let's see. This is actually Sukracharya, and this is actually in the section where he's trying to convince Ali Maharaj not to surrender to Vamanadev. Yeah, that's what. So actually, so again, it's important to see the context to this series of verses. Okay, so we actually in our we as Vaishnavas, we say that Sukracharya was wrong. Yeah, we say he was wrong to actually, in the mood of this section, he was wrong because he was trying to convince Balamaraj you should not, don't do what Vishnu is telling you, don't do what Vamanadev is telling you. So anyway, my key point still stands. Context is important, and we gave that example. At the same time, as much as possible, we want to live in such a way that we can assert the truth. That way, it not only is it good for us, but it maintains a sense of trust across the community. The danger is if people even start thinking, oh, this person, they think it's okay to tell a lie for a particular reason, then they'll start questioning. Anytime you speak to them, they'll think, well, maybe you're lying, maybe it's another lie you're telling me because you think it's okay to lie for this reason. And so it can actually backfire against the individual. So as much as possible, this is my real assertion, as much as possible, we want to be people who are open and honest, and we want to arrange our lives and our mission and our service and our communities in such a way that we can always be honest, because it builds integrity, it builds trust, it builds support, and it helps people to build deep bonds and deep connections because they feel that what they see is actually what they get. So just on that point. But thank you for bringing that that verse to our attention.
Well, thank you so much, thank you so much. Does anyone else have something else to share or ask before we call it a day? Actually, there is this popular saying that if one speaks the truth, he needs not worry himself to remember anything.
Yes. Yeah.
So we should try to be truthful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone? Well, I think, Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, we may ask you to give like a concluding words, because personally, I have, of course, I will go back to listen to this katha, but we all wear neck beads, necklaces, and the necklaces is made up of different separate individual beads. And I see a thread of pearls of wisdom shared in your katha today. And the one I admire the most is what I shared in the chat room, that no one is punished for their sins. We are punished by our sins. So nobody wants to be punished. And therefore, we have to try to stay away from sins, because if we continue sinning, then we're going to be punished by the same sins. Nobody somewhere is going to punish us, but the sins themselves will give us the punishment. Yes. So thank you for that, and such similar pearls of wisdom shared with us today. And with that being said, if you may make some concluding statement, and then we'll bring this to a final closure. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. So just to build on what you're saying, yes. So the key points here is that, first of all, if scientists are very honest, they'll come to understand that for the origins of reality, they need a different scientific approach. If they're honest, it's a natural conclusion. That's point number one. Point number two, when we do the wrong thing, we actually damage ourselves. I was listening to a class by our Guru Maharaj, and he was talking about how the modern society, so they're childish. This is what he actually said, meaning that People do things. It's like children thinks that they're doing something wrong. It's like a child thinks I'm not going to school. I'm really getting one over on my parents. But the parents are mature enough to understand you don't go to school. When you grow up, life's going to be really difficult for you. You're just damaging yourself. It's not the parents have a job, right? They have their house and whatever it is. The child who thinks when I'm not going to school, I'm really mischievous and I'm very, very dangerous. And it's like, no, the parents know, like you're going to really suffer because what you're not doing properly now is going to be the very thing that's going to cause you, the same person, to struggle later on. You're doing it, you're damaging your own opportunities, you're damaging your own chances. And sins are like that. So to your point, sins are things which actually, if we engage in them, they cause us suffering. Whether they cause other people discomfort or not, that's secondary. But when we do something wrong, the repercussions come upon our own consciousness. So it's actually a form of self-love. We should love ourselves enough not to do things which are going to damage us. We should love ourselves enough not to do things which are going to cause us to have to deal with unnecessary reactions in our own lives, unnecessary complications, unnecessary difficulties. We should love ourselves enough not to do that. And the third thing is we therefore want to be truthful. Truthful allows us to see ourselves clearly, to see what's good, to see what could be improved. And above all, we want to do those things which will remove any of the barriers to our bliss. Okay, we have to get our bliss on. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.